thank you again for joining me this interview. So we are going to discuss about the violence against women in Afghanistan. As you are deeply involved about Afghan issues, especially human rights issue in Afghanistan. My question is, the first question, I have a couple of questions actually, but I'm going to ask you how widespread and intentional is the violence against women in Afghanistan today?
Thank you very much, Zara Jan, for the interview. And of course, it's very appropriate this week to talk about violence against women in Afghanistan, because we are starting, I think, tomorrow, the 16 days campaign to stop violence against women everywhere in the world. And each year we have this campaign, and it finishes on 10th December, which is Human Rights Day. So how widespread is your question? Well, I think it depends how you define it. It is very widespread if one defines violence against women as it is usually defined to include not only physical violence, but structural violence and psychological violence. So it is really pervasive. It impacts all women in Afghanistan. And there is, unfortunately, a history of such violence in Afghanistan due to the very patriarchal system and patriarchal culture in Afghanistan, which is why 20 years ago the parliament and the activists introduced the EVO laws and the EVO institutions. However, it has got worse because of the Taliban's systematic erasure of women, and not only erasure of women, they have erased most of the laws and structures like the parliament, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, the DOAs, the AIHRC, that they've removed both the laws and the institutions that helped to protect women from violence, including the shelters. So it's very widespread and a very serious situation for all of these reasons.
Thank you. Based on what you observe, how much the violence has in Afghanistan increased? I mean, obviously, Afghanistan was not a perfect country for women, but based on what you described, that there is a systematic attack from Taliban side. I mean, do you think the violence against women has increased, right?
Yeah, of course it's increased. It's increased institutionally, structurally, because women are removed from public life. They're not, there are restrictions on education, employment, movement, and access to health, and so on. This makes women and girls more vulnerable. Also, as I mentioned, there are all of these Taliban decrees, which we're well aware of, well over 100 now, and the law on promotion of vice and promotion of virtue and prevention of vice is another example of a problem that has increased violence against women. And it's increased also because of the economic situation. People are living in poverty. Women are often confined to their homes. The Taliban themselves are violent towards women, especially protesters, or even women who don't wear the clothes, the hijab that they want, that the Taliban want. And then there's also because of a combination of poverty, unemployment. There's a lot of family tensions. And so it's more likely that domestic violence from other members of the family, including the male members of the family, has also increased. But it is difficult to get the information. And one of the reasons it's difficult to get the information is, as you know, as a journalist, and I know as a human rights monitor, access to information is more difficult than it used to be, because the de facto authorities don't want us to have access, and because also freedom of expression is much restricted, so that people, women and girls in particular, but men and boys too, are too afraid to speak out, because they are concerned that that there will be retaliation or reprisals against them, and that their safety will be at risk. And even the media organizations inside Afghanistan are also restricted. So they are prevented from reporting what might be called political matters, but also social matters, such as the level of violence against women and girls today. So for all these reasons, we can say that the violence has increased, the concerns are much greater, but also that it is increasingly challenging to be able to get data, precise data on the level of violence and how much it has increased.
Richard, you mentioned about these all factors and different forms of violation against women, psychological, physical, and domestic violence, and economical pressure on women's life. Which form of violence against women and girls worries you the most right now?
Well, they all worry me a lot right now. But if you ask me, give examples, I'm very concerned about the forced and child marriage, which is we are tracking increases in that for the reasons that I've just given, economic and other reasons, and also we're concerned about violence by the state authorities, including in detention in prisons, because we have been receiving reports for now 4 years about this kind of violence when especially women protesters who are peacefully protesting according to their rights are arrested and often are subject to different forms of serious violence.
Also, if you are not, you mentioned we as a journalist and you as a special reporter of the UN on the human rights issue are not directly able to monitor the women's condition of violence cases in Afghanistan. Do you think it will be a huge concern or something like we should worry about most now?
I think it's difficult, as I mentioned, because of lack of freedom of information and freedom of expression. So there are also no longer the safe pathways for women and girls to report violence. In the past, they could have reported to the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission or the Ministry of Women's Affairs, or to the special procedures, the courts and the prosecutors that were established under the EVO law, the Elimination of Violence Against Women law. There is now no parliament, so even the members of parliament can't receive complaints. And there is a big problem with access to justice because all of the judges, whether they're women or men, were removed. And there are no women now involved as judges or prosecutors. So for all of these reasons, it's extremely challenging and difficult to get information. However, the women are still speaking out. They are still resisting and are still telling their stories. And my guess is that you, and just like me, I too, receive stories from women every day, pretty much every day, often just messaging me. Then we talk to them. And so we are still able to collect critical information. Now, this happens without going to the country. And you might ask me, well, now you're not allowed to go to the country. Does that make a lot of difference? I would say not really, actually, because one is that even when I went to the country previously, there were short visits, and it was one had to be very careful not to do harm by exposing the women. And secondly, now the UN has a budget crisis. And even if I was allowed or permitted by the Taliban to go to the country, there is only enough budget for one 10-day visit a year. So it's not that much. So what we can get online and in person, from women inside the country, but also from speaking to women who have recently left the country and maybe suffered violence, is the major way that we get the information.
Oh, this is a very big concern, to be honest. I hope you get the necessary support for you what you are doing, and it's very important for us to have you on the board, at least to as observer. So the next question is that a year after your report about abuse and sexual assault of women in Taliban custody, what is your updated assessment today?
We're still getting reports. It's difficult to document them because our policy is that we should only document in detail the reports from women once they are safe. And at the moment, we think they are only really safe after they left the country. So we can interview and we do document cases after women have left the country. It's very difficult to do it inside the country. And also because they can't get inside the country, it's difficult to get the type of medical and psychosocial support that survivors of sexual violence need. I think the second thing is that most of the cases that we have heard about have been in the detention of these intelligence, that is known as GDI, General Directorate of Intelligence, which runs, which arrests people and runs detention centers which are not accessible. I'm not aware that any monitoring can take place in those centers. In the prisons, the prisons that are run by the de facto Office of Prison Affairs, we see less concern. And also we know that UNAMA and some other agencies are able to visit those prisons. And prison visiting is really important, especially without notice. That is what the international standard requires. And this is under the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, which Afghanistan ratified back in 2018, I think. There should be allowed unannounced visits to prisons. And it's by the unannounced visits that you can sometimes find out what is happening. Because if you're giving too much notice in advance, then they can hide the people. So we are a long way from that. But I would just say that we do receive very concerning reports. But on the positive side, we know that there are now some accountability processes at the ICC, International Criminal Court, and maybe there will be other accountability processes, possibly at the ICJ, and that those people who have been responsible for sexual violence will ultimately be brought to justice and held to account. So justice may not happen next week, but I am confident it will happen in due course.
Thank you, Richard. So despite many challenges, what can be done to reduce gender-based violence and discrimination in Afghanistan?
Well, I have been promoting what I call an all-tools approach to human rights violations, and this applies also to gender-based violence in Afghanistan. And we should remember when we talk about gender-based violence, I'm glad you used that term, it's violence against all genders. So it may be violence against women and girls. It may be violence against members of the LGBTI community, or it may be violence against boys and men who are standing up for women and girls. And I'm aware of men who have been victims of violence because they were standing up and protecting the rights of women to to be free and to be able to protest, for example. So what we need is, I would say four things. The first is, I mentioned it just now. We need accountability processes that for these violations and crimes, which are crimes against humanity. And we've begun to have some of those processes. And to do that, we need to be able to document the truth of what is happening. Second, the civil society in Afghanistan, which is under pressure but is still alive, needs to be properly supported politically and with funding, so that civil society organizations, especially women-led organizations, need to get increased funding for their activities and their work to protect women. There also needs to be increased humanitarian funding for Afghanistan. Humanitarian funding has been reducing over the last years, and we want it should again be increased to meet the desperate needs for humanitarian support in Afghanistan. Also, funding is needed to expand education and economic empowerment opportunities for women and girls in Afghanistan. So first, accountability. Second, support and resources. Third, I would say advocacy. We need, this is where we really look also to the international community to impose sustained and principled pressure, including the establishment of clear human rights benchmarks for engagement with the de facto authorities. And all members of the international community should unify to make it clear that there'll be no normalization of the de facto authorities of the Taliban unless and until there are demonstrable improvements in human rights, especially for women and girls. And then finally, I think inclusiveness, that we need to make the rights, the voices, and the agency of women and girls to be center to all discussions about the future of Afghanistan. So they need, or in fact, all Afghans, including women and girls, need to be meaningfully included in discussion and decision-making processes about the future of their own country. And then it may be finally, there needs to be more support for hosting of Afghan refugees. We have seen refugees being returned to Afghanistan, mainly by Iran and Pakistan, but now we're seeing it by other countries, even in Europe, and returning refugees. It is not safe to return refugees to Afghanistan. They are at risk of persecution, and there is also, it is too much pressure, economic pressure, on the country to do that. But those countries who are supporting and hosting refugees need more support themselves, particularly those neighbors that I mentioned, like Iran and Pakistan, but other neighbors too, to the north, like Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, also need to receive more support from the from other countries. You know, there's a moral imperative in Afghanistan from the Western countries. They intervened in Afghanistan in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks on the US. And they invested a lot, and they assured Afghans that they would continue to support their human rights, whether they're women, girls, or minorities, ethnic and religious marginalized groups. And then they withdrew very quickly. I think Afghans knew eventually the international community would withdraw. Everyone was prepared for that, all my Afghan colleagues and friends, but they did not expect it to happen in the way that it did, and just to be abandoned. So I think that is another thing. And then finally, last and not least, is that women and girls experience life, they experience discrimination, they experience violence differently according to who they are. So if you are living in a remote and very maybe remote area, or you're living in a very conservative district, you may be more restricted, more subject to violence. If you are from a minority, a group that a marginalized group that is often discriminated against, such as Hazaras, such as also other religious and ethnic minorities, be they Ahmadiyya or Hindus, Sikhs, or even Turkmen and Uzbeks. Those are extra layers of risk and discrimination. So in responding, all of the agencies, be they UN agencies or non-UN agencies, need to take into account the intersectional discrimination that occurs in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Richard. These are very great recommendations. So my next question is that what responsibilities specifically does your organization, I mean UN, have to address these issues on Afghan women issues basically?
So I have a team at the UN, it's quite a small team, but I'm appointed as an independent expert to monitor and report on the situation in Afghanistan, and also to document human rights violations. There are other parts of the UN. The UN is a big body. It has the member states which are members. It has organizations like UNAMA, which is a special political mission appointed mandated by the Security Council. It has the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and it has all the other different UN agencies, funds, and programs like UNICEF, and World Food Program, World Health Organization, UNHCR for refugees, and all of the different programs. They all have responsibilities. They have different roles. Some deliver food, some deliver health, some protect refugees, some protect human rights. And we need to have a common strategy and a common and good coordination. At the moment, I don't think that is enough. I also think the member states don't have a sufficient common strategy and program. You know, the Taliban have an ideology. We call it an ideology. You could call it a vision. They have an idea of how they want to run the country. It's not an inclusive idea. It's a narrow idea, and they use violence. We need to counter that with an even more compelling set of ideas. I think we have the ideas, and they're based in human rights, but we need to be more unified, to have much greater solidarity, the international community, including the UN, with the people of Afghanistan. I feel I stand up for and I work for the people of Afghanistan, and I want all my colleagues to do the same.
Thanks, Richard. For my last, but of course not the least question, is that what women rights activists believe that the Taliban have established a system of gender apartheid in Afghanistan. From your point of view, does what is taking place in Afghanistan continue its gender apartheid?
Yeah, I've written a few different reports on this, as you may know. I started writing about this in 2023 in June, together with the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And then I've written different reports since then, describing the Taliban's institutionalized system of gender discrimination, oppression, domination, and persecution as meeting the criteria for gender apartheid. I have also listened to Afghan women who've been describing the situation as gender apartheid. They first started doing that a long time ago, in the 1990s, actually. And then for 20 years, it wasn't really necessary. But since 2021, many Afghan women feel that the term gender apartheid it resonates because it so clearly captures the intentional and ideological nature of the Taliban's removal of the rights and dignity of women and girls. And it also affects men and boys and gender diverse persons as well. So it is a strong mobilizing concept, and it is not yet a legal concept. In international law, there is no such thing as gender apartheid. There is only apartheid, which is defined on the ground of race so far. But there is a process which is underway at the UN headquarters in New York. It will take several years to develop a new human rights treaty on crimes against humanity. And I'm supporting the inclusion of gender apartheid. More or less, I'm supporting Afghan women who are calling for the inclusion of gender apartheid. However, we should also remember that already gender persecution is a very, very serious offense. It's a crime against humanity. It's included specifically in the Rome Statute, which establishes the International Criminal Court. It is the law of the International Criminal Court, and gender persecution can already be prosecuted. And we have seen just some months ago that the Taliban's supreme leader Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, and their Chief Justice, Sheikh Haqqani, have both had arrest warrants issued for the crime of gender persecution. So we should not forget that as a very important factor as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. If there is any last comment from you wanted to add to this conversation?
I think it's important to define gender-based violence broadly, to include the structural violence as well as the physical and psychological violence. And I think most of the other things we included. Maybe I'd just like to say one more thing about how much in awe I am of the way in which Afghan women and girls are resisting, continuing to resist and not giving up. They are an inspiration to all of us. They don't give up on education. They don't give up on their other human rights. They don't, they give hope that in the future, the situation will improve. And they make it clear to all of us that every human being is born equal, regardless of gender. And we have to start from that, and that every human being is born equal in rights and in dignity. And no one can take your rights or your dignity away. They can try, but they will fail. And so I would like to call on all of my colleagues throughout the world to give voice, to take note of the discrimination, the gender persecution, the gender apartheid, and the violence against women and girls in Afghanistan, and to speak out and to take action to stop this in future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zara.